Hello, Alla. Thank you for joining today.
Hi there. Hi, Christine.
It's really nice to have you here, and there's no one I'd rather talk to today. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of meeting Alla Weinberg, Alla is a pioneer in the design and UX space. She's someone I've been a fan of forever. Not forever, but for a very long time, for more than a decade. And I'm thrilled to have Alla on for a few reasons. One of them, she's the go-to expert in the psychological safety space and the safety space within a workplace culture. So I would love to talk with Alla a little bit about her background there. Currently, Alla is principal of design operations at Harmonic Design. She is also the founder and CEO of her own company, Spoken Wheel, and the author of the fantastic, amazing book, Culture of Safety, which I just had the pleasure of reading. Alla, I'm so happy to have you here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me today, of all days.
Of course, little teaser for everyone. It is in my time zone, it's about 1 o'clock on November 6th. So it's the day after the election. Yes. And I said this to Alla before we started out. I think we were both debating whether we were going to have this conversation today, and we both decided, yes, let's do it. So I'm especially appreciative to you for that.
Yes. I think in times like these, I'm sure we'll touch on it. Connection with other people is what we need to help us regulate ourselves, to feel better, to feel safe. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. And I do expect we'll talk about that. One thing I wanted to mention to you before I even ask you about your story, you're right. And I'm feeling that connection is key at these moments. Sometimes for me and others, I also find that in these moments where it's a tough time, it's sometimes very simple to go into your shell a little bit and
yeah.
isolate a little bit. I appreciate you mentioning that connection is really important at these types of stages.
And I do tend to myself withdraw in stressful moments. I'm sure other people cope in that way, go in, and sometimes that's what we need to self-care, and other times what we really need is to hold each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, to start, we're going to talk about a lot today. We'll talk about a little bit about what's happening today. But to start, can you share? I like to begin by asking if you could tell your story a little bit. What is your story, Alla?
I guess my story, if I start at the beginning, is I would say a painful one. I am an immigrant to this country. I'm a refugee from the former Soviet Union. And so that even an, even that in and of itself, and I immigrated when I was a child, was a traumatic experience for me, leaving your homeland, the only language that you knew, coming to this country, and my family had $100 total when we arrived.
How old were
And
you when you
I
arrived?
was 8 when
Okay.
we arrived, so I was still very young here. Luckily, being a child, I was able to pick up English very quickly because I was a kid, but obviously that was much harder for my parents.
Mhm.
And I grew up in poverty because we were immigrants and my parents had immigrant jobs. My dad was a taxi driver, my mom was a manicurist. And I didn't realize how poor, like as a kid, I didn't realize how poor we really were until I got into adulthood.
Mhm.
And aside from that immigration trauma that I faced, I also left childhood with what is called complex PTSD. And complex PTSD is often something, is a trauma that happens usually in childhood where you experience, it doesn't even have to be actual physical abuse. It can be neglect as well, but it could be physical abuse, it could be emotional abuse, it could be sexual abuse, and it could also be neglect at the same time. And so you experience trauma for a long period of time, and don't feel like anybody can help you with it, that you can talk to anybody, and that you can't leave. And so it's something that's very chronic, very long lasting, and like physically changes your brain structure, basically. And I left my childhood not only with the trauma of being an immigrant, of living in poverty, but also with CPTSD, mostly because my parents were not, because again, we're immigrants, my parents were not around. They were working 12, 14, 16 hours a day. And so the majority of the trauma that I faced was neglect, but there was also a lot of mental health issues in my family because of, again, the immigration and the toll and the stress that it took on my parents. And I had no idea. Now,
So I
obviously,
wanted to ask.
yeah, I had no idea. Especially when you're a kid, whatever is happening in your home is what you assume happens in every home, and that this is the way life is, and this is normal. And it wasn't until I had a child that I started to realize, oh, I don't want to parent that same way that I was parented. And I started to get triggered by certain challenges I had just being a parent. And I didn't know what was going on for me. And that was when I sought help and started to finally understand, oh, I have something called complex PTSD.
Yeah, there's so many, and I'd love to continue. I was feverishly taking a note just to, there's a couple of areas that we have a couple of areas in common. We've both been active in the product and UX space. We also both have kiddos at home, younger kiddos under the age of 10. They may not describe themselves as younger kiddos. Alla, you mentioned that, and I've heard this quite a bit, and I felt this, that once you have a child, that's oftentimes when you start recognizing more of those triggers. You said when you were younger,
Yeah,
you weren't recognizing this doesn't feel right. Was it really just starting as you saw how you were engaging with your child?
it really was. And I had a very rough postpartum. I had postpartum anxiety, not depression, anxiety. And I really just didn't understand what was going on. Why was I feeling so triggered and so on edge and so emotional so frequently? And I really was feeling like I was failing as a parent, and again, didn't know what to do because I wasn't modeled when I was growing up the behavior that I had wanted, or the parenting style that I had wanted, or the type of parent I wanted to be. But also, this seeped into my work environment because I chose to work at companies that were abusive, because that's what I experienced, and that's as a child, and that's what I thought was normal, truly. I didn't think anything of it. And a lot of tech, I don't know if you feel this way, Christine, but like a lot of tech cultures are abusive. And I'm just going to call it out. Not
Well, that's,
toxic, but actually abusive.
can you talk to that, what that means to you? And of course, yes, this resonates quite a bit. I was thinking about this. I'm 25 plus years into my
Hmm.
career in tech. I'm wondering, what does it mean to you? I don't think there's ever been a corporate culture that I've been embedded in that there hasn't been something that's been abusive. But
Yeah.
before we go there, I'm curious, what does that mean to you? What does it mean for a culture in the workplace to be abusive?
It's really the way that we relate to each other. And there's multitude of ways that people can relate to each other in an abusive way. People can be verbally abusive, put people down, have contempt towards them, be dismissive of them, undermine them specifically, right? And as women often face, take their ideas and say that it's your own, right? They can be physically abusive. People inappropriately touching, sexually abusive, right? Like sexual harassment, very common for women in the workplace. They can be financially abusive. People can say, unless very coercive, unless you do this or do what I say, you won't get that promotion. You won't get on the project that you want to get to. You won't move up the ladder, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I've experienced mostly has been verbal abuse in that sense, really being very dismissive, definitely putting me down, and also the feedback and performance reviews, which is completely biased and
Yeah.
not actionable in any way. But I also know a lot of people have been sexually harassed, sexually abused in the workplace. I know people have been let go because of their gender or their race
Mm-hmm.
or other identity characteristics, not anything to do with competency. And similar to what we're seeing today in the election, women not, especially in tech, not getting promoted
Yeah.
just just because they're women, even though they're more experienced, more competent, um, better at their job
Yeah.
than the other white man that is getting promoted,
Yeah.
and moving up that ladder. And people sometimes call it politics, right? They're like, oh, there's nothing wrong with politics, but there's a lot wrong with politics.
Yeah. There's
Politics can be abusive, and it's also a way for people to protect themselves, uh, cover their own ass, at the expense and harm of other
yeah.
people.
Yeah. There's so much to unpack here. I did want to ask you before we talk a little bit more
Yeah,
about the election results, this notion of coming from a background where you've experienced complex PTSD. You mentioned that when you've gone into organizations, and I've seen this as well, you grow accustomed as a child to what you've learned, and
yeah,
that starts seeming like the normal. And you were mentioning you've gone into organizations where it has been abusive more so than coming in and having a healthy organization. Can you
yeah.
speak to that a little bit? To what degree do you feel like your background led to the specific organizations you chose?
When I was younger, especially just at the start of my career, I was happy just to take any job that
Mm-hmm.
somebody offered me because I was just so excited that somebody wanted to hire me. I did not feel, again, because of my background, that I was in any position of power in that scenario, that I was just lucky to get a job offer.
Yeah.
And I know many people probably feeling that way now, given the market, right? And I didn't, and again, because of my background and my complex PTSD, when I was interviewing with folks, there was no red flags that were going off for me. Like, oh, this might not be a healthy environment, or the hiring manager is very domineering, or
Mm.
anything like that. I had no idea. I couldn't spot it. I was completely blind to it because to me, it felt completely normal. This is how people treat each other. Well, this is what work is supposed to be like. I just have to suck it up and do it, right? And
Yeah.
do the work. But it also led to me like not being able to hold down a full-time job for long. I often quit maybe a year in. I haven't to most of these companies,
Mm-hmm.
two max. it just it's just been very hard to, like, because I would reach a point where I got triggered as a result of this environment that again was I felt was normal. I was completely
Yeah.
blind to, and and then from that trigger, and when I say trigger, an emotional trigger, something that reminds me of maybe a time period in my childhood that was very difficult for me and very emotional. I literally would have a kind of knee jerk reaction and I would just quit the
Yeah.
job.
Yeah. I Something really strikes me, and I'm curious your take, Alla. So, the audience for most of these conversations is women in tech. And before we got on this conversation, we've talked previously, and I was saying the level of authenticity and vulnerability you share in your story, women I've talked to in tech, they have stories.
Yeah,
And I've talked with many of these women that they're reluctant and hesitant to share their stories in the tech world and community. What led you to this point where you're so open with sharing your story, and like how did you reach this point? It's really hard for some women, and I've heard from many of them that they're thinking, oh, this could actually be detrimental to their careers to share their real
right.
authentic story. Like, what is your take here? Like, how did you reach this point?
A lot of therapy, to be honest. I've been in therapy. My son is 5 years old. I've been in
Yeah.
therapy for 5 years.
Okay.
And very specifically trauma focused therapy, not just regular talk therapy, but trauma focused therapy. Um, And one of the, and many people may not know this, but one of the biggest symptoms or side effects of trauma or somebody that has PTSD is that memories get shattered in your mind. They're not in the linear order. It feels literally like a shattering, like a glass that was shattered and it's scattered all over the place, and you can't quite make sense of it. And what therapy has helped me do, that has brought a lot of healing and relief for me, is be able to put memories from my childhood into linear order. That is very important. And like that understanding of what actually happened to me helps me make sense of the choices that I made afterwards. I
Mhm.
made them unconsciously. I made them with all my trauma coping mechanisms. But now I understand like why I did that, because I've been able to recapture and actually remember parts of my childhood where previously before therapy there was some years were blank. I could not even tell you what happened
Yeah.
during some events or during some times in my life. And so that was really powerful. And if folks that are listening, of what worked for me does not work for everybody, but what worked for me is EMDR
Mm-hmm.
specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And EMDR is an eye movement that you do while you're processing, and it helps you, it rewires your brain. And again, be able to put some of these memories in more linear order or make sense of them, or finally be able to feel the feelings that have been stored in your body from the trauma that you've experienced. And I would venture to guess most women in tech have experienced trauma either in their childhood or from the workplace itself,
Yep.
from the
Yep.
tech workplace itself. So I don't feel like anyone's immune
Yep.
to it.
It was interesting. EMDR, you and I spoke about this. I actually had a therapist on, Catherine Norman, a couple of weeks ago to talk about EMDR therapy. And it was a really interesting perspective where she said, yes, agreeing with you, Alla, that there's many women, most people have experienced some form of trauma at some point
Yes.
in their childhood. What she did say also is that for people trying to figure out what their next step is, even if you don't think or know you've experienced trauma, EMDR is still an amazing way to start understanding. Maybe you had a bad, poor experience here or there. It may not have
Hmm.
been major trauma, but EMDR is also an excellent approach for those who don't even have any sense that they've had major trauma in their past.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
again, I had no sense of it at
Yeah.
all for many years. I was a workaholic
Yeah.
because that was my coping mechanism. I didn't want to feel all all the pain that I've been carrying around in my body, and one of those ways is by working
Mm-hmm.
hard and working long hours and just focusing on that, which was of course rewarded in tech, because tech, actually having a life outside of work or your life not centering work, is not encouraged in
Yeah.
tech.
Yeah.
So
Was this around the same time you mentioned your son was born? You've been in therapy for 5 years. At what point did you start focusing on your work establishing cultures of safety? Was it in the middle of this period, or like
No, it was
when?
actually right at the beginning. So
Okay.
I went on maternity. So I had my son. I went on maternity leave, and it was actually in that moment, while on maternity leave, is when I wrote my book. So
Okay.
I had 6 months of maternity leave, and that is when I wrote my book, because uh, I was feeling so unsafe in my own body, in my own life, in the environment at work, that I got to the point where I was just feeling like I don't want others to experience this. I know others are experiencing it, but can I be a catalyst to change, to help change that, or at
Yep.
least start the conversation so that I can protect or save some, even one other person from having to go through these
Yeah.
experiences.
Can we talk a little bit about safety in
Yes.
that since this morning, I've been up for
Mm.
about 7 hours, dropped my son off at school. Admittedly, I did not wake up feeling safe. And depending on what you mean by that, not super emotionally safe, even physically safe,
Yeah.
trying to think about what's coming up next. I wish I was not displaying that hopefully too much to my son. But since he went off to school, I've been having calls and messages with friends and former colleagues where a lot of us are feeling a lot of emotions: fear,
Yeah.
sadness, anger. But this lack of safety has also been coming up for people
Yeah.
this morning. Can you talk a little bit? I know the election just happened, but how are you feeling this morning? What would you tell people who are feeling this lack of safety based on your expertise? What's happening for you today, and what are you hearing from people?
I very honestly, I also don't feel safe. I
Yeah.
think if people are feeling a lack of safety, because that is a real emotion. You're not overreacting. That is
Mm-hmm.
I think the appropriate feeling to have right
Yeah.
now, um, because the results of the election to me, um, were indicating that people are choosing hate and disconnection over connection. And we as human beings have evolved to have a third survival mechanism. The first survival mechanism is freeze. Even like amphibians, snakes and things, they can freeze, right? And maybe and play dead, and maybe the predator will go away. And then all other animals also have fight or flight with predators, and human beings, we've created a third survival mechanism, and that's connection. If we're connected to other people, if we're in community, we feel safe. And when we don't have that connection, which is really what I'm feeling today, I don't understand how people could vote for hate. That's when we start to feel unsafe. And also, again, as an immigrant, as a woman,
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely, I have some intersectionality. I'm definitely feeling very unsafe. I don't know what's going to happen with my health care. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what's going to happen with my citizenship status. My grandparents were part of, my immediate grandparents were part of the Holocaust. This is not that far removed from me. And what I want to say is it's absolutely appropriate to not feel safe at this time, because I really don't believe it is safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that way about our work environments. I feel like there's a lot of gaslighting that happens in work environments where, especially in big corporate environments, which I've worked in some, where there's an internal campaign to convince people everything's great, we're wonderful, this company is amazing, look at all the great things we're doing, and not address or ignore or even just say, no, that's not happening, to real issues such as sexism, racism, and verbal, physical, sexual abuse that happens
Yeah.
in organizations.
I had wanted to ask you more about that, Alla, and the work you've been doing. So I can't tell you so many times. I've experienced this, colleagues have experienced this, clients I've worked with, where there's just this general lack of trust and authenticity. And what I mean by that is feeling reluctant to actually saying what you're observing and what's on your mind. And you mentioned the gaslighting piece. Like, there's such a lack of authenticity in many organizations in terms of what
Yes.
people can bring. And also, what you're saying, the safety in saying their reality. And I'm wondering, when you come into an organization, how do you start assessing, like, when are you brought in? Who brings you in? And how do you assess the culture in terms of its level of safety when you first arrive?
I'm usually brought in when a team, and I usually work with the design teams because that's just my background.
Yeah.
When that team is on fire, I wish
Mm-hmm.
they would bring me in before it's burning down, but
Yeah.
I'm usually brought in when the house is burning down at that
Mm-hmm.
point. What that looks like is a lot of folks are leaving. There may be a lot of infighting. It may be work is really slowed down or stalled. We just can't get things done. Um, Really bad relationships with cross-functional partners, product managers, engineers, and most of the time that I'm brought in by a design operations person, sometimes the leader of the group, because the leader is saying, okay, this department is really in trouble. We're really having a
Mm-hmm.
tough time. Oftentimes, the leader, though, is the one that is the problem. So
Yeah.
I do informational interviews with folks, do one-on-one interviews with each team member to really understand and listen from their perspective what is going on. And then I can often let them know, synthesize that information and let them know, here are the dynamics
Mm-hmm.
that are happening on your team. And I'm often brought in to, because the team does not feel safe to tell their leader, they don't know if they're going to face repercussions, right, or
Mm-hmm.
retaliation, to tell their leader that they're the problem and that they're having issues with the leader. And this is maybe going to be new information, or maybe you'll recognize this, but in tech specifically, the people that get promoted are the people that display more abusive or
Mm-hmm.
narcissistic behavior,
Okay, that does not surprise me. It's so interesting,
which is
Alla.
not often women.
Well,
So,
yeah, I had shared with you, and it's so interesting with the work with Lift Up Connections. Initially, I was focusing on the target audience was women in midlife, whatever midlife means. It's an arbitrary number, but women who are at a certain stage. I just turned 50. I was seeing a lot of like minded women who are very far in their career, but trying to figure out what's next. My offering has pivoted a little bit, that it's really focusing on women in tech specifically, because you're highlighting something that I've seen. I've talked with a lot of women. Midlife, mid to senior careers can be really challenging, but tech is its own monster. And
yes.
as you're talking about what women are dealing with in the workplace, I guess my question for you is, when you come in and elements of an abusive workplace, and sometimes it's the leader, how do you coach and work with the leader? Are there specific tactics and approaches you use to bump up the level of trust and respect and health? Like, where do you go when you see that there is this level of abuse and some of it's coming from the top?
Um, it really depends on the leader. If they
Mm-hmm.
are willing to take a hard look at things about around their role in it, um, then we have somewhere to go with
Mm-hmm.
that, and we can have those conversations, and we can start to. And I'm a big proponent of this operational, making changes in operations specifically, because the way we work with each other, what we talk about, what kind of meetings we have, how we have those meetings, who's running them, what's the agenda, all of that um, impacts how we relate to each other.
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, impacts our culture. And so if the leader is willing to do that, to take a hard look at their role in how they talk to people, how they treat people, what they're valuing and what they're rewarding versus not, what kind of behaviors, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are they tolerating versus not? Then we can make progress.
Yep.
If the leader feels there's nothing wrong with them and they just have a bad team, there's nothing I can do,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to be honest. I can help. What I can do is work with the team so that the team can connect with on a colleague level and a horizontal level to each
Mm-hmm.
other and have connection there so they at least feel some solidarity and some safety. But what often happens next is that team falls apart, most people leave, and the new team forms,
Yep.
there's not really a way to save that team.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
also looked at and I talked about what is happening at the executive level, what is being rewarded, that this leader, that it's okay that this leader behaves this way, treats their team in this way, or individuals. And often, what is rewarded is the bottom line and not not the how you got there, but that you got there, whatever
Yep.
that bottom line is.
Yep. Yep.
And I think that's the struggle we are facing right now within the last 2 years as tech workers, is the focus has really been on short-term quarterly results, and definitely not on people's well-being, not on people's safety, not on culture. It's just the quarterly results. And that's why we see so many of these mass layoffs, or sometimes sneakily policies that they hope will result in people mass
Absolutely.
quitting,
Yeah.
like
Yep.
the Amazon back 5 days a week back to work.
Mm-hmm.
That is a strategy to get people to quit. That's
Yep.
what they want.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. I this may be a little bit of a therapy session for me today. I'll admit that because
Welcome.
because what's also I really meant it. There's no one I'd rather speak with today. I've been thinking even more about the election results where my audience, if it's me, but also my expanded audience, women in tech, highly qualified in senior roles. I'm hearing a lot from them that they're feeling unseen,
Hmm.
and their worth not being valued by
Hmm.
others, and having to work at a level that's so far beyond their male colleagues. And you were talking about the election
Yeah.
results last night, and I've been trying to understand where my feelings are coming from. There's a lot of fear and sadness. There's also a lot of anger that I think women are
Yeah.
feeling today. And I'd just be curious your take. There's the anger around that there's so much hatred and lack of connection where people would vote for this candidate, but also anger around the comparison between who those two candidates were, their
Yeah.
abilities, their skill sets, their values, and how are we like measuring the standards and quality of those candidates. And that's something I'm very angry about, and it
Yeah.
resonates with me. I just love
Because
to.
we see it over and over again in tech specifically. My experience is in tech, so I can't even speak to other,
Yeah,
types of
me too.
organizations. But this is what we see over and over again: a competent, energetic, smart, highly qualified woman
Mm-hmm.
going up against a man that has no like is
Yeah.
unqualified, obviously creates harm, chaos, destruction wherever they go, and somehow it's still a race.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That shouldn't even be a race.
Mm-hmm.
That shouldn't even be a comparison. But I have faced
Thank
this.
you.
I have faced this at work.
Mm.
And
Yep.
I feel like, and when a lot of my colleagues, we reach a certain level and we can't get any higher.
Yep.
And it has nothing to do with merit. It has nothing to do with our abilities or capabilities or experience. It's
Mm-hmm.
just that we are not a man,
Mm-hmm.
and that's it. And for some reason, men get a pass. They get the free pass. Oh, it doesn't matter that you're incompetent. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter all these other things. You
Yep.
get the pass. But then women, well, you have to prove it to me. You have to work harder. You have to show me value, right?
Yep.
Where men don't have to do that. It
Yep.
is not an even playing field at work, and it's not one at the national level
Yep.
either.
Absolutely. There's so many paths for women in tech. So I'm not saying there's only two paths to go. A couple of themes that I'm seeing for women who are they're powerhouses, they're badasses. That's the only way to
Right.
describe them. They're at the senior level, they're at the pinnacle of their career. They haven't yet hit that top level. And what I'm hearing these women say, and this is a generalization, but there's a couple of paths. Keep working it, playing the game a bit to work within the systems that we currently have,
Hmm.
or just get out of tech. And I'm seeing
Yeah.
a lot of women hitting this inflection point that they're deciding which way to go. And there's no
Yeah.
right or wrong answer, but I'm sure you hear this from others as well. When you hit that inflection point, do you have advice or recommendations for women? Like, the systems are not going to change
The
overnight.
systems are
Yeah.
not going to change, period.
Yeah.
They're
Thank
not
you.
going to
Yeah.
change. Get out.
Yeah.
That is my, honestly,
Yeah.
this is my opinion. You can, of course, ignore it. Everybody has a different life situation. But my recommendation is get out. And again, people bring me in, I do this work. It, it doesn't stick.
Mhm.
Especially over the last few years, I just have seen more blatantly. I think it's always been there, but more blatantly, the execs don't care.
Yeah.
They don't care about you. They don't care about promoting you. They don't care about your well-being. They don't care about life work balance. They do not care.
Yeah.
Okay? And if you're reaching that point of what else can I do? There is nothing else you can do. You can't. The system is not designed
Yeah.
for you.
So this is the question.
Period.
I agree,
The
and
system is
I'm
not
taking.
designed for you.
I
And that's
agree.
true
Yes.
in nationally as well. In the United States, the system is not designed for women, Black and brown people, LGBTQ people, trans people, immigrants. It is not designed for those people.
Absolutely. I agree. Here's my struggle, and I'd
Yeah.
love to hear your thoughts. You're right. The system is not designed for.
I feel like we have to just be like eyes wide open, right? If you need the job, let it be a job. Let it be a job that supports you financially. There's nothing wrong with that. Take care of yourself as a
Mhm.
woman. Take care of yourself
Mhm.
and your family, whatever you need to do. Fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it does not need to be like, don't give it all. Don't give that job everything.
Yeah.
Don't sacrifice your family for this
Mhm.
job. It is
Yeah.
not worth it. They don't care about you. If you left tomorrow, they'll just put up a JD and replace you. They
Yep.
don't care.
Yeah. Back to what's going on in the
I'm
world, and
sorry
it's
to be like,
no, it's
I
so
don't know,
helpful.
but
I'm also going to ask you a very unfair question, and you
yeah,
can say, no, Christine, come on, because there's, we're in processing mode. A lot of us are feeling grief, a bit of despair. You can't just push that down, and you don't want to. You want to feel
yeah,
your feelings. One thing I think about as a mother, and I'd like to talk a little bit about this.
yeah,
I'm feeling my feelings right now while my son is at school, and there is some despair and lack of hope.
yeah,
I cannot stay in that space of despair because I can't, because I want to start seeing what could my place be to help my son, his peers, and figure out how do we make some change despite all of this systemic barriers. And I don't have the answer, and maybe there isn't an answer, but for those of us who are feeling a bit hopeless today and want to make a difference for our children and for the world, we don't have to be parents. But do you have a message for us? And it may be too soon.
No, the message is you have to feel all the feelings. You have to let
Mm-hmm.
yourself. This is not a choice at this point of where we are, because if you don't feel it now, you're gonna get sick and you're gonna feel it a different way.
Yeah.
Because what happens, and this is also something I learned through therapy, is emotions that are not processed, that we don't feel fully, that we don't allow ourselves to feel, don't leave our body. They stick
Mm-hmm.
around.
Mm-hmm.
And what they do is they wear and tear at our body, and then we get sick. And there's a lot of feminine issues actually that come up as a result of that, such as like fibroids, endometriosis,
Mm-hmm.
other feminine related issues that start to come up because of unprocessed emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And so and I would share with your son that right today, I don't feel good
Yeah.
about what we are. We're in a place where, at least in this moment in our life, people chose a president that sows hate and that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't want to include everybody in the way forward.
Yep.
And truly today, I don't know where to go from here, but I don't think this is the day for action. I
Yep.
don't think this is even the week for action. And I think this is the week to really allow whatever arises to feel that anger, to feel that grief. We're gonna cycle through
Yeah.
that. And there's a beautiful model, which is the 5 stages of grief. It's called the Kubler-Ross model of grief, the 5 stages of grief. We're going through that
Yeah.
as a national collective right now. Maybe at points you feel numb, at points you feel angry, at points you feel sad. And I cannot tell you how long this process takes. That is different for everybody. But what corporate will tell you is get over it and get back to work and
Mm-hmm.
be productive.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm telling you is you have to give yourself the time to be to honest and talk to the people, talk to your children about it, talk to the people you love as you're going through it, because it's normal. And they need to understand they may go through it in the future as
Mm-hmm.
well. There are many moments in our life where we feel grief, such as deciding to leave that job because you're like, I can't change the system. Maybe I'm going to leave tech. There's going to be a period of grief.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know how long that is for everybody, or getting laid off in one of these mass layoffs. There's going to be a period of grief. You can't just get over it. Yes, you can suppress it all you want,
Mm-hmm.
but I said it's going to come back to you as illness and dis-ease. And this is the only, if I learned anything through therapy, this is the number one thing that
Yeah.
I've learned.
Yeah. I appreciate your encouragement for all of us to feel our feelings. And this is not the day to, as much as we want to act and make change, this is not the
Yeah,
day. It's to feel our feelings. I will say this morning, my son just gave me a big hug. He knows my feeling.
yeah,
A big hug.
exactly.
I think your message also, the more we can all connect, even if with our feelings, sometimes, as you said, we may just need some time, but connection and kindness and love for your community and having that time this week just to have that connection, I think is huge. It's sometimes, even today, this conversation is so helping me. It's not my natural inclination to want to connect when I'm feeling those feelings,
Yeah,
but it's so important.
yeah. And I woke up anxious in the middle of the night, and I looked because I fell asleep before really results started to come in, and I saw it and I cried. And
Mm-hmm.
then I woke up, I cried some at night, and I woke up and I cried some more today.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to my son about it, and I said, I'm really sad. I'm feeling really sad today. And
Yeah.
there are some things that happened. He doesn't really understand the concept of the government and the
Yeah.
president and things yet. But I said there's just some things that happen that I feel very sad about and scared about, and that's okay. And
Yeah.
we don't have to fix it, and we don't have to move on any quicker than we are ready to
Yeah.
move on. And maybe you need a week, maybe you need a month, maybe you need 6, maybe you need a year.
Yeah.
Whatever that is fine.
Yeah.
But American culture, being so productivity focused, so output focused, is okay, I have to put a time limit on this.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think many people are going to think this. I have to put a time limit and then I have to get over it and go on.
Mm-hmm.
You have to feel when it's complete for you. And there is no time limit. I don't know what that is for each individual. And whatever arises,
Mhm.
let it be
Yeah.
there. That's the
Yeah.
work.
I could talk to you. I just teaser, Alla. I am going to have to invite you back because we're only going to get a little teaser discussion
We didn't
about
even get
what
to
we
talk
had
about
planned.
the fact
I
that
know.
I'm leaving
I
tech.
know. That's what I want to
Yeah.
talk about. And there's a natural, so I'd love to start that conversation now and hopefully convince you to come back
Yeah,
and
of
speak with me.
course.
What I thought about, even when you were talking about this level of disconnection and hatred that may have led to the outcome in this election, what spoke to me, and we'll talk a little bit about this book you recommended to me
Hmm.
by Stephanie Fu, but one theme that came out of this book in my travels is that hurt people.
Yeah.
And you and I have talked a little bit, and I'd love for you to share. You've spent a lot of time working on safety in the workplace. You are making your pivot to work on safety for parents and
Hmm.
dealing with trauma. I'd love for you to speak to your new purpose and mission and where you're
Yeah.
moving.
Psychological safety, I think, was the first step for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second step of where I am now, again, because I've been in these organizations and I see that at the systemic level, executives do not want systemic change.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want to um, put my energy towards something that it's trying to convince people of something they do not want.
Mm-hmm.
And again, through a lot of therapy, where I am ending up is wanting to work with parents who want to break the cycle of trauma. And this is where I found myself when I had my son, and I still find myself today. I don't want my son to experience the same trauma or pass on the trauma that I experienced in my childhood onto him. And that takes a lot of healing for myself, and also not knowing how do I show up with him differently? How do I have a different relationship with him than the ones my parents had with me? Because I never saw it. I don't even know what that looks like. And there are a lot of resources out there of how to parent, but I don't see a lot of resources of how to heal yourself as a
Mm-hmm.
parent so you don't pass, so you can really stop those generational traumas and pass it down. And for me, it comes from this core desire to protect children. I just like I don't want anyone to experience the type of work environments I experienced. I don't want any children to experience the type of childhood that I experienced either. I don't want any child leaving childhood with CPTSD. I don't want that to happen. And at a very big picture level, I truly believe that even if in a small percentage of the human global population, if like a small percentage of parents can heal their own trauma and break that cycle, I think that's when we're going to see those systemic
I
changes.
absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. I'm wondering, Ala, as you were mentioning, you're making your own pivot. You said, when I
Yeah,
asked advice for women in tech, what should they do? And you said, get out of here.
yeah,
You are, let's talk about this. A lot of women are thinking about there could be a gradual approach to
of
getting out
course.
of here or just making the leap. Can you share a little bit about your story and the steps you're taking to move into this new
Mine
direction?
is a gradual approach. I
Yeah.
still work in a,
You have a job. Yep.
I have a job. I still
Yeah.
work as a design operations manager in a service design consulting company.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't just completely quit and say this is all I'm doing. And so to me, this is my life's work.
Mm-hmm.
And so and this is part of the information I want to share with other parents. I'm taking it at the pace that my nervous system feels good to take it. And it wouldn't feel good for me to put myself in a place where I don't feel safe financially, where I don't feel like a financial security. Then I wouldn't be able to do this. I wouldn't be able to work on creating the concept and the approach and and founding this new organization to
Mm-hmm.
help parents. And so I'm very much, for me personally, I very much am taking it slowly, um, and gradually. And what I plan to do, and what I did with Spoken Wheel as well, is just, if this is what my job is and this is me working on the side, very gradually,
Yeah.
like, those things shift. And it's not, I jumped off the cliff with no
Mm-hmm.
parachute. I don't
Mm-hmm.
recommend that. That's going to really jar anybody's nervous system. And we're not creative. We can't think. We don't do as well when we're activated in
Yeah.
that way. And so I do recommend, like, what I'm doing is putting my energy towards where my heart is and the impact I really want to make, and where I feel I can
Mm-hmm.
make the impact. But I'm doing it, I would say, strategically. I wouldn't say jumping off the cliff is the right move for me
Yeah.
personally.
I think
So,
the challenge I'm seeing in my groups, especially for some women in tech, is that they would like to take the gradual approach. However, with the tech market as it is, and with some women, like we haven't delved too deeply into ageism and
yes.
sexism, but these systemic barriers in place, somewhat feeling like they need to make the pivot because the tech community is just not welcoming to them anymore. And it's this scary position to be in,
Yeah.
that they're not welcome anymore. They need to find their love and passion, but they don't have as much of the safety net as they'd like. And I
Yeah.
guess my question for you would be, any advice or recommendations for women who are feeling a little lost right now and left behind?
My recommendation is to take care of yourself. If that means getting a job, a different kind of job, because
Mm-hmm.
tech's not accessible, right? Get that job. Take care of yourself. Make sure to look after your health, right? That's really important. If you're not healthy, if you're sick, for something's going wrong, there's no way you can get the job, or you can work to even find out what your purpose is in the world, and figuring that out. So I would say radical, extreme self-care, which is
Mm-hmm.
what most women don't do, because we care
Yes.
for everybody else except for
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. And so I've talked to other girlfriends as well, and the question I often ask them is, what would be, like, when they're like, what should I do? I was like, what's the most caring thing to
Mm-hmm.
do for yourself? What's the most loving thing that you can do for yourself? What's the most kind thing that you can do
Mm-hmm.
for yourself? And the answer to that question is what you
Yeah.
should do. Maybe
Yeah.
the most kind thing is, I don't know, to get a completely unrelated job that you can, with skills that you can transfer in to
Mm-hmm.
something else, um, just so you have income and you feel like some sense of financial security
Mm-hmm.
there. Or
Yeah.
maybe the most caring thing to do is to talk to your spouse and say, hey, I want to quit tomorrow.
Yeah.
Will
Absolutely.
you support me? Can I get your support? And then this is how I need to be supported, in doing that. Maybe the most caring thing to do is to talk with folks like yourself, Christine, or a coach,
Mm-hmm.
and try to understand what is the right thing for me, what's uniquely for me the right next step, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not the same for every person. We all have our own path, but listening to ourselves and doing what is most loving towards
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, you can't, you like, you cannot go wrong
Yep.
doing
Yeah.
that.
With all of your expertise, and I am going to ask to have you back on the program, Alla, for many topics, but I'm thinking to close today, as you're doing your work, and I know you're gradually getting there, to think about your offerings and how you best support parents to deal with their trauma and
Yeah.
their to be the best parents possible. I'm wondering, we've talked about not all parents recognize that they had
Yeah.
this trauma. Once there's a recognition, we talked about therapy, but with your work, with parents and where you're taking your
Hmm.
framework and methods. Once parents recommend they do need help, in
Hmm.
addition to therapy, any recommendations for them in terms of where to get started?
I think really, and I can share after the call some additional book recommendations, but understanding trauma. Because again, if when you don't even have the recognition that is
Mm-hmm.
something you've experienced and maybe carrying in your body, you have no idea how to approach it.
Yep.
And I do have some books to recommend about just uh, getting an understanding of trauma. And I think also for me, the first step is starting to work one-on-one. That's my first step, is starting to work one-on-one with parents that are like, I think there might be something going on and I don't know, but I don't know. Let's unpack that together, because coaching and therapy can actually work very well side by side. And coaching can help again with that educational piece, and with knowing how to um, react in the moment, what's happening, and how to move forward from here, how to really start to break those cycles. And therapy is more like, let's look backwards and heal what has happened. And so awareness is always the
Mm-hmm.
first step. Learning about trauma, what impact it has on you, starting to put some of those memories into order, and building new coping mechanisms with the understanding of trauma that aren't trauma coping mechanisms,
Yeah.
but ones that are much more healthy, is definitely the way to go. And some people may be finding it difficult to know what is my next step, even in from a career perspective, because trauma is blocking
Mm-hmm.
even that knowledge. I wasn't able to find my purpose until I've done enough healing to really know, ah, this is what I really feel like is my life's purpose, and what I want, the impact I want to make in the world, and what I want to be able to do. But a lot of my trauma was even blocking me being able to access that.
Yeah.
And awareness first.
Yeah. Alla, thank you so much for the
Oh, my
conversation. It was a
pleasure.
nourishing conversation for me,
Thank you for
especially
having this
today.
today.
Thank
Yeah.
you.